Why can coffee professionals try coffee and name 5 flavors? Is it a superpower, or you can do it too? And spoiler alert, you can do it. This video will help you to better enjoy specialty coffee and develop skills which will help you to easily recognize the flavors which are mentioned on a coffee bag. And this skill is very important to improve your recipe adjustment, because you need to understand what to adjust and when. And this notebook is a great addition to this video because it contains every knowledge, everything that you need to know in order to improve your sensory and overall knowledge about coffee, how it behaves, how to work with it. Because coffee is a living product and among the most complicated on earth. Recipe adjustment. First of all, let's talk about your basic parameters: brewing temperature and grind size. Usually in a perfect world, you can describe it as acidity and body. These are two main parameters that you will need to watch on when thinking about what to adjust. If you see that the coffee is watery, it definitely needs the grind size to be decreased, to make it smaller, so that you have richer body. And if it lacks complexity, lacks acidity, it is dull, not pronounced, not contrasty, flat. Usually it's the temperature is too low. Of course, it is way harder than that, but if you use my SSD recipes, which are in this notebook as well and on my channel, 12 grams recipe, so it's usually enough to have only 2 parameters to think about. But if you think about more parameters, you will get better result, because there are a lot of layers of complexity that you will learn about later on. And of course, it is way better, way easier to adjust the intensity of your coffee by using a refractometer, but it can be done even with your flavor receptors. Flavors and coffee behavior. Coffee is a living product, so after roasting it lives its own life, and within 20 days it will change a lot. So if you don't perceive something that is on the coffee bag, maybe you perceive one flavor and there are 5 mentioned, it's because coffee is not ready yet. I can't personally brew coffee when it's closed. Usually after roasting there is some period, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 1 day, maybe 3 days, when it is perfectly fine when brewing. Then it closes, drops everything, lacks body, lacks complexity, lacks acidity, everything is flat. And then it brings back to life after around 10-20 days. Usually it's this range. So I personally prefer to use coffee which is 20 days after roasting for my training, because for recipe development, for training, because it is the most stable coffee, 20 plus days. Even 3 months old is totally fine, especially with these recipes, because they are adjusted to be working with degaussed coffee as well. So coffee freshness is among the important parameters that you need to consider while assessing the coffee. And next one is temperature, because coffee is very temperature dependent beverage, because when you drink it in a hot cup, in a cold cup, it will contain way different flavors. Even flavors will shift, not only the amount of them. You will perceive more flavors in a cold cup for sure, most of the time. And of course you can brew coffee so that it will be tastier in a hot cup and in a cold cup. It depends on coffee and how you approach the brewing. Usually if you want to drink it in a hot cup, it's better to bring more intensity to the beverage, so use smaller grind size. But in a cold cup it will fall out and just destroy its flavor. Just know, if some flavors are on the coffee bag, maybe your coffee is not cold enough to perceive them, especially with delicate flavors. They usually floral, some citrus, they're usually in a cold, warm cup. It also could be very tricky to separate the flavors in specialty coffee, because there are a lot of them and it's a mix of flavors. So to recognize something, to pick it out of this pattern, very, very hard. With practice it will be easier, way easier. But first month of training, don't expect to name 5 flavors right away. It could be sensation of flavor and not just flavor. So you will not perceive clear pitch. It's very rare, happens, but very rare. Mostly you will perceive something like apple acidity, apple type acidity, maybe apple skin, maybe dried apple skin, and apricot skin, something like this. So pay attention to all of the details. They all matter, and most of the time is just part of the flavor of some fruit or berry. Some flavors are very easy to recognize, like berries, but some delicate flavors are very tricky. And you'll need to focus specifically on these flavors in order to recognize them. If you don't do this, it will just taste a cup of coffee, but when you pay attention, take your time, you will see them. So we'll need to focus on one specific flavor at a time. This is the most important part. Focus on one thing and concentrate until your brain rewires. And of course, for proper taste assessment, you need a properly brewed coffee using proper water. So everything should be as perfect as possible. That's why it's easier to either use Turkish coffee, because you can't fail with Turkish coffee with my approach, or use SSD recipe for Prover. These two will give you solid base to work with. But remember, water, very important. If you fail with water, you will not recognize anything, or it will be extremely hard. Physical preparation. The nose must work perfectly, and it should not be dry. In summer especially is pain because everything is dry, air conditioners, etc. So nose should be a little bit wet, but without mucus, etc. So it should be clean, working properly. You can smell something and you'll recognize the flavors. This is a good sign. Also, if you eat something before taste assessment, it's preferably to eat before hour or 2 hours prior to taste assessment. But if you eat something, remember, avoid mustard, avoid sauces, avoid sweets, because they will affect your flavor a lot. So they linger something in your taste buds or something like that. They shift the flavor completely. Maybe you tried mustard in the morning, in the evening you will not be able to taste coffee properly. It will skew your picture, it will be too sweet maybe, etc. So it will hide a lot of flavors for some reasons. Coffee is not a simple product. Reset from distractions. You should be calm and focused, because when learning, imagine you in a classroom, you're in a phone, you're listening to your teacher, you will not understand anything and you will not remember anything most of the time. So focus on one thing, calmness, no loud sounds, no music, full concentration, full immersion in the process, at least when learning. The biggest thing which is not obvious is ventilation. It is far better to drink coffee outdoors because you need fresh air. When you are in a room, especially a small one, if there is smell of coffee, you grind your coffee, the smell of it, the flavor, aromas will fill the room, and this will be your neutral flavor. So you will not perceive this flavor so intensely as with the fresh air, but you sipping coffee, and with the fresh air you will perceive it's like a fresh flavor. When you are immersed in a room with a flavor which is already in your cup, the intensity of this flavor will drop because the brain will think, oh yeah, okay, it's safe flavor. So I perceived it safe to consume, and that's a trick. So you need to trick your brain by some aroma, some use armpit, some smelling something to distract from coffee flavor, coffee aroma, or just go out of the room, go in, but go back in, and you will feel aroma more intensely. But then again, it drops. So your brain needs always to be activated. The easiest way to reset is just fresh air. Flavors catalog. If you've experienced some flavor, and if you didn't experience and you found it in coffee, you need to compare it with something. So you need to access your flavors library, and in order to do that you need to constantly activate the paths, the connections, to perceive the flavors properly, to link them so that when you perceive them you already know where to go, where to compare them, to what to compare them, to which library section to go. Even if you are not familiar with the flavor, like some tropical fruits, there are a lot of them, and obviously most of the people probably haven't tried some tricky ones, and they don't have understanding what is it. So it's better to try to categorize it somehow, to memorize it, and at least give it a color code. So the flavor is color. That's why we have coffee flavor wheel. There's just one of them, Australian, but as you can see, it is colored. And it is very, very nice because you, by color, right away you can see where to go. You don't even need to read. Because berries, obviously, red, black, you go to red, etc. So flavor recognition, this skill, this library connection could take a few months, easily. So you just need to train and continue to do that. Focus on some flavors, maybe you have some problematic ones, like I have floral and citrus. That's like hardest flavors for me to perceive because I don't usually think about them when tasting the coffee. So it's like quoting the phrase from book or movie. You need to use it quite often in order to throw it in a conversation. Keep it fresh. Right now, can you imagine what red berries tastes like? What about an apple? Can you think of an apple sweetness and link it with the acidity of an apple? How about dates? Can you recall the texture? What if it's a grapefruit? Can you separate the flavors of juicy pulp and flavor with the white skin? Or the overall aroma of grapefruit? All these flavors could easily be in one cup. Imagine decomposing that. That's very hard. How to memorize the flavors? Flavors decomposition. So we have descriptor, flavor descriptor, like apple. Why not apple? No, let's go with apricot. I like them. When you decompose this descriptor, it contains flavors of acidity, sweetness, bitterness, etc. Maybe salty. So it's just connected to this descriptor. And of course, you need to think about these independent flavors first. And then when you have all the pieces of the puzzle, most of them, you can name the descriptor because it will be way easier. So when you're smelling or tasting some product, pay attention to every parameter and try to describe the flavor of fruit, of something that you eat. Everything. Because coffee sometimes have beer, cheese, weird stuff, really. So everything you can find in coffee sometimes. So pay attention to details, decompose by flavors, your descriptor. And one way to think about that is by using acidity, because there are a lot of types. I will not name like malic acidity, etc. Citrus, apple, wine, they have different type of acidity. And when you think of these categories, it is somewhat easier to link to the product. To like berries, they have this kind of acidity. So by type of acidity, it is easier to memorize the product. When you try something new, pay attention to the acidity, to which category it's closer. Pay attention to all of the sensations that you perceive, especially texture, because this is maybe one of the biggest parts of the flavor, texture and acidity. Sweetness as well, but texture and acidity is like, wow. You perceive something, apricot, always you'll perceive apricot. It's very easy because of the skin. So if you try something, oh, it has texture like mango. It's like soft. It's hard to describe it. I don't speak English, by the way. Soft, creamy, stuff like that. So when you know texture of mango, it is easier to stick flavors to acidity, sweetness, to this type of fruit. And then you have some library from which you can choose, because it's one unit of flavor from which you can recognize it. And it's very important to pay attention to all of the parts of the fruit. Skin, pulp, closer to kernel, because it could be very different flavor. It's more ripe, by the way. Different ripeness of flavors. Try them as well, because apricots could be early apricots or sweet, sunny apricots, like very ripe ones. So fruits are very different. And example, mango I will read because I don't speak English. So it is great for your library collection and to enjoy the mango because it's very nice. Because you have creamy texture, pine, sweetness and delicate acidity. And you can write it down, everything that you perceive in some fruit. So that you can go back to this note and try to perceive these flavors by reading. It's a good training also. And again, it is important to color code your flavors because of these color wheels. And SCA, Specialty Coffee Association, have their own wheel, better example. So it's very practical because you go from the center, from the general direction, like it's fruity. And then you go berry 2, what? Berry 3, citrus fruit. Lots of berries, variations. So color code, it will help you a lot because acidity is like associations in color. Right away you will perceive color in flavor. And from there it's easier to start to go. At least you know the direction. I personally sometimes struggle with spices, and this is one of the things I use because it contains all of the spices that I need to see in order to check if it's this or that. Because spices, a lot of tricky things can happen, and again, mix of flavors. It could be 2 spices, 3 spices, hard to separate. That's why it's better to focus on one word. There are also some mad aroma kits, which are chemicals. I don't like them, but some people use them, especially Q graders, because they need to calibrate, they need all of the flavors collection and train to recognize them. They just open it, smell it, and place the card that they perceive. But it's only a part of flavor usually. Usually the products are way more complex, and only taking out the flavor aroma from the whole fruit is not enough for me. So my brain just refuses to understand these artificial flavors. I prefer juice. It's easier. Like, take some juice, use it, and write it down, what you perceive, and just read what you drink, and it will be enough. Because passion fruit, it is easier to get in the juice, to sensation of the passion fruit. So some flavors, juices are your friend. And by the way, candies, because coffee contains a lot of caramel flavors, and caramel could be very different because of different amount of degradation of sugar, etc. So also I highly recommend you to try bean to bar chocolate, because when you try regular chocolate, dark chocolate commercial, it starts to get, and better at least in Ukraine, starts to get like not that bitter. It's like more neutral. And bean to bar chocolate, dark one, without lots of sugar, it will be just incredible. It will be fruity, some floral maybe, but mostly fruity. Berries you can perceive in chocolate, in pure chocolate. So bean to bar is the way to go, and some coffee specifically contains bean to bar chocolate flavor. So bean to bar chocolate, very different, how they roast it, how dark they roast it. So enjoy the chocolate and train these flavors, because nuts, chocolate is the basics, and which you can find probably in every coffee. Q grader says in every. I don't think so, because like if it's pronounced, I'm mentioning it, but if it's not pronounced, it's not there for me. So don't be afraid. Bean to bar chocolate is not bitter, at least if done properly. It's quality beans, and you will enjoy it. And it's easy to memorize, at least for me. It was just like few bars, it was 1 bar, because it's so tasty. You will remember this sensation right away. Practice tips, flavor assessment. At first, we use dry aroma. So we grind the coffee, smell it, rest a little bit, smell it. You probably need to smell it for like a few minutes because you need time to think, to focus on everything. Then, when you brew it, if it's proper dry aroma. After first pour, smell it. After second pour, you also can smell it. After third, it will not be representative like some flavor. This is very important. In a brewed cup also, try to smell it, try to mix it, agitate it, and then smell it, because it will release the flavors, aroma, when you're mixing it. And the flavor could be the most intense part of the flavor. So when you're drinking, you don't perceive it. And it's coffee like basic, but aroma could be very, very interesting. So you can enjoy coffee, but just smelling it sometimes. And it will be more enjoyable to just smell it than drinking. That's why. By the way, if you didn't watch interview with Bruce Dickinson, the Charismatic Voice channel, on the Charismatic Voice channel, with Elizabeth Jarov, watch it because he smells coffee. He don't drink it, he smells it. It's not for him. For concerts, before them. So very interesting interview, recommend. So after smelling, you write everything down, and then you try coffee from hot to cold cup and write everything down. But how to do that, how to take notes. First of all, pay attention to cold cup a lot, because it will contain, first of all, more flavors and delicate flavors which you will not be able to perceive, as I've mentioned earlier. Always, always, room temperature cup is your friend. Cupping, coffee professionals started to avoid cupping using their spoon from 10 minutes. So hot cup they avoid. They start from around 14 minutes nowadays. At least our coffee importers and graders. 14 minutes, it's hot enough to perceive some hot flavors, but then it will start to open up, and cold cup is just the best, usually. Turkish coffee also, try cold cup. Don't skip it. The most important tip, how to physically perceive the flavor. You need to exhale by nose. So you sip in your coffee, you're starting to move your tongue up and down, because this movement tells your brain that something is happening, and to constantly activate your flavor recognition part in your brain. That's why moving your tongue, and it will just, coffee will flow differently, and your tongue will understand that it needs to think about the flavor. And while doing so, you exhale by nose. These flavor samples, they recognize most of the flavors, most of the aroma, which is the most complex flavor, because your tongue usually 5 basic flavors, stuff like that, not much. Your nose is the machine. That's, by the way, why nowadays scientists start to use the machine. So they exhale through the nose, the machine reads the results and makes some magic, so it understands what you like, what humans like, and machines starts to displace humans. Then after that you swallow the coffee and you start moving your tongue up, press it up and move from side to side. That way you'll better perceive the texture and aftertaste as well. So these 2 tips are golden, and don't forget, you need to exhale and focus while exhaling. This is the most important part, because this is exactly when you perceive the flavors. When you don't think about this, it's done automatically, but when you focus on that, it will be easier to recognize. Flavor puzzle. Now when you collected some sensations, some acidity, bitterness, you can assess it, you can bring your puzzle to some picture and name the flavor descriptor, at least general understanding what is that. And it is time to take your notebook, maybe this one, and note down what you perceive in terms of general understanding of flavors. I have test guess the flavors, which I've used already. Very useful, because you brew some coffee every flavor in front of you. At first, start from general categories, and it's better to focus on one flavor at a time. That's why basic flavors, basic general directions are mentioned here, so that it's easier to feel. Focus berries. Does it have berries? Maybe, yeah, we'll think about it later, what types of berries, but yeah, it contains it. Citrus? Maybe. Sometimes it takes like 20 minutes to analyze the cup. Most of the time it takes like 20 minutes, because towards the end you will have more data and something will just, yeah, is this flavor. So dried fruits, tropical, wine, tea, which is in Ethiopian coffee very frequent. So you focus on every descriptor, read, think, feel, then you can recognize specific flavors. So it is just for convenience, so that you don't need to keep it in mind. You need to focus, and it's a distraction when you have big field to think of. When you have a narrow vision, you can focus, and it's easier to rewire your brain that way. And again, I struggle with citrus, and sometimes it is soapy flavor which is closer to the skin, and when you perceive it, you're like, I don't know what is that. It's just tasty. But when you think about, maybe citrus, what citrus, and you're starting to get to this library, what does citrus taste like, then you get the idea, yeah, this part is why it is citrusy. And by the way, you will be surprised after a month of training, how well you start to recognize and how fast the flavors, especially like dried fruits, chocolate, like snap, you feel everything. Because berries, most people, I think, they will feel it right away if they perceive it. And by the way, don't be afraid of not getting exact flavors. General directions are fine, and sometimes coffee just don't contain specific flavor, because it's just a sensation of some flavor. That's why it's just blurred. If coffee is expensive, like 87 Q score, which is here, it usually contains 2 or 3 flavors which are very clear to recognize, and the rest are the like general categories. So don't think that it's something wrong with you. It's just coffee could be different. Maybe when Hugh Grader cupped it, it was different. It roasted differently, etc. Freshness of coffee, water. Anyway, let's recap the process. At first, overall intensity and balance. That's what you think about, because you need to understand, is it balanced and intense enough, so that you can understand, will it be easier to perceive the flavors if it's not balanced, if it's coffee, or it's your brewing and it's better to brew your coffee. Then you get in overall colors of the flavors and general profile, and hopping through every sensation like texture, acidity, bitterness. Then you get to, again, to the general profiles, and so you're constantly hopping between these parameters. On a cold cup, hot cup, warm cup, these should be done constantly, circles. And when you can't perceive anything, it also happens. And what you can do is very easy. You can just place your coffee bag in front of you, drink, and scan these flavors. Try to perceive them. That's very, very nice training, because they're already trained, and it's the easiest way to try to think, why did they mention this flavor? What part of this flavor is in this cup? So that's my general recommendations. And one more, which coffee to start from. It is better to start from washed processed coffee, at least for me, because it's cleaner. And it's also best way to start from Ethiopian coffee, African coffee in general, because it is usually not contain chocolate and nuts at huge amounts. And if you use Central America, it could be very hard because of these dark flavors. It will overpower the delicate ones. Yes, they usually contain citrus flavors besides the chocolate, but it's very hard to to see this tiny flavor. When you drink African coffee, is just fruity, berries, floral, everything. So it's easier to work on, wire your brains, and then try another regions, continents. That's probably it for today. Get a notebook and your coffee will be much tastier. And you will train a lot, because it's basically barista courses inside. Except Deep 27 use higher brewing temperature. It's 90 degrees Celsius, but could be 93 easily if coffee is not complex. So use these as a base, and don't forget that you can experiment by having knowledge. And there is a lot of knowledge, I would say. Thanks for watching. See ya.